All right, so we're going to show you how to convert your mechanical cable-driven speedometer from a 1984 to 1990 Jeep Cherokee XJ or MJ Comanche into an electronic speedometer using parts from a 91 to 96 gauge cluster. So in order to do this, there's a few different parts that you need. You need the BoxyJeep adapter kit. So these are sandwich plates that will allow you to mount the newer speedometer into the older cluster. You also need your original cluster. You can go with a black-faced gauge cluster, or blue is also fine. You just need to make sure that the back has this type of face. So you need this square with the X through it. If the back has a face like this, it will not work. We do not make a kit for this. There's nowhere to connect the wiring. It's not going to work for you. So it's got to be like that. It can be dummy gauges. This one will also work. You can see it has that same type of pattern. However, the one that I showed you before won't work. And then as far as finding your 91 to 96 donor, you want to make sure that it attaches with 3 screws. So the 3 screws that are on the actual circuit board here. If it has 6 screws, it will not work. The gauge is too large, it will not fit in the cluster. So after you unscrew the gauge, you'll see that this is what it looks like on the back. The other thing that you want to make sure you grab is the bezel and acrylic cover from the 91 to 96 gauge cluster. The location of the trip reset is slightly different. So you could see on the Renix, it's basically closer to the 85, where on the high output speedometer, it's further off to the right. So you could potentially re-drill it. I don't know how it would look, but ideally you grab that too from the donor. All right, so now we're going to actually get started and show you how to convert this untouched Renix speedometer into a electronic speedometer using the same gauge cluster. All right, so as far as tools that you need, you really just need a Phillips screwdriver, a Dremel. Make sure it's a high-powered Dremel. And other than that, I don't think there's anything else. So let's get started. So first things first, you're going to want to remove all of the screws that are holding the bezel and acrylic plate in place. Unfortunately, you won't need this, so feel free to discard. Make sure that you remove this piece on the, the button to reset the trip odometer. Take that off, it just pulls right off. All right, so now what we see is basically all the different gauges. You could tell that this is one of the nicer clusters. It has full gauges, doesn't have dummy gauges. So now what we're going to want to do is remove the gauges and get started. So from the back, there's 2 screws that hold in the mechanical speedometer gauge. You can just unscrew those 2, and it just pushes out from the back. Oh, there's actually 1 screw at the bottom right here that I missed. So now that gauge is out. You can see it's mechanical. This is where the speedometer cable actually comes in from the transfer case. So we don't need that anymore. You'll also see that there's this rubber spacer in the back here. There's 2 steel spacers that you need to remove. So now you can see kind of what's exposed there. On the back, part of the printed board kind of goes into this area. We're not going to need this either, and we'll end up cutting it off, but it's in the way right now. So that goes off to the side. So let me show you just kind of like dry fitting what the sandwich plates look like and how those fit. So our kit includes inner and outer plates, as well as the hardware to attach them. So the outer plate ends up going on the back like this and clips into place. And you'll see that there's 2 kind of like positioning stubs. Those will stay there. And then you have 3 holes right here. So that's where the screws to mount the speedometer as well as connect the electronics to it. So you have ground, ignition, and speed. So with our harness kit, or if you buy the pre-made harness, this will actually connect back to the sensor itself, and that's how you're going to draw that signal from the actual sensor. And then on the front side, you have this plate, which goes right in here. So overall, looks pretty straightforward. You'll see that the 3 holes where the speedometer comes through, or the mounting screws come through, are right there. And it also has an indentation for this protrusion here. So now what we need to do is we actually want to test fit our electronic speedometer. So you'll see that it has this white spacer at the back. We actually want to remove this. The speedometer will not fit with this spacer in place. So the other thing too is that these screws that I'm removing, they hold the circuit board in place on the back of the speedometer. So once we remove them, we just want to be a little bit careful to make sure that we don't let this come loose and fall off. This is also a good opportunity to look at the back of the speedometer. If it's been submerged in water, sometimes it'll be melted. Could be issues with the capacitor. So just take a quick look, make sure it's good. You don't want to do all this work and then find out that the gauge that you're swapping in is actually bad. The other thing too is that this is a good time to potentially make some adjustments to this, if you know what I mean. So if you want it to match what you're taking out, you could do that, or you could leave it as is. It's pretty straightforward. There's a washer there that needs to be shifted, and yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, so now if we take it and we try to insert it, we'll see that it's a little bit tight. It doesn't actually fully fit. There's some modification that we need to do in order to make sure that the housing can fit this newer speedometer. So this is a little bit of an involved process. We're going to be using a Dremel to remove a lot of this kind of like surrounding area. And you probably wonder, is it necessary for that to be there? And if you look at the newer speedometer housing, no, it doesn't have those. So it's fine. So let's get started on that. Okay, so before we actually start doing any dremeling, I would actually suggest removing everything from the housing, because you're going to end up getting all sorts of plastic debris, and you don't want it to get in your gauges. This is also a good opportunity to be able to clean off your gauges. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove all of them, put them in a safe spot, and that way the cluster will be kind of nice and clean and ready for us to get things set up for the new speedometer. So one other thing too I'd recommend, as you're taking out gauges, put the screws in the back of them so that you don't lose them, because they are different sizes depending on which gauge it is. So this is temperature gauge. I'm going to put that to the side safely. And then up here, I think this is the oil pressure gauge. So a lot of the smaller gauges do have similar size screws, but just to be safe, you do probably want to put them back into the gauge itself so they don't get disorganized. Okay, that ends out. This down here is the volt gauge. This also is a good opportunity to clean up any dust or dirt that's in your gauges before you put things back together. So this is the fuel level gauge. This actually has quite a few different connections, because not only does it measure the resistance coming from the fuel tank, but then there's also a circuit board that triggers the indicator light when the fuel level is below a certain position or a certain amount. So there's that. That one's out. So now if we look at the front, there's really only one thing left, and that's the tachometer and the fuel level indicator circuit board. So tachometer has 5 screws, I believe. So these 3 up here. And then these 2 big ones. One of the other questions that a lot of people have had is why can't you just use the high output gauge cluster in its entirety for this swap? And the reason for that is that quite a few of the gauges are actually different. So for example, the fuel level gauge uses a different resistance range, so that wouldn't work. Also, the circuit board that indicates when the fuel is low is different, so that wouldn't work. And then additionally, tachometer is different. And then obviously the speedometer is also different. So a few of them are similar. Oil pressure, voltmeter, and coolant temp. Those are all the same, but everything else is substantially different. So here's that circuit board that I was talking about. This actually looks at the amount of fuel coming through the sensor reading, and we'll turn that little light on indicating that fuel is low. A little bit challenging to get out. I'm going to use some of the longer screws from one of the other gauges to help push this guy out. There we go. Okay. All right, so we got everything pulled out. The cluster is empty now. Everything is safe and off to the side. So now we are ready for the best part, which is dremeling the housing. So this is kind of a straightforward process where you want to kind of see where the new gauge will fit properly. So when we try to put it in here, it looks like this piece right here is in the way, and then I think this up here will also be in the way. So yeah, let's get started on that. I'm just going to clean things up a little bit and give us some space, and then we can go from there. All right, so we are ready to start cutting. You definitely want a wired Dremel. Battery-powered ones just are not powerful enough to cut through this. And I also like to use this cutoff wheel. It works the best. So I think the first thing that we want to get out is this part right here. So yeah, you probably want to grab some pliers. That'll make it a little easier to pull these parts out. All right, so that piece is out. Let's take a look and see how things fit. So we're almost there. Right now, the part that's blocking us is basically this piece up here. So a pretty large portion. We'll cut that out, and then I think we'll be in a better spot. So that's out, that's out, and that's out. All right, so let's test the fitment, see how it looks. We're very close, so the only thing that's hitting is this piece in the back here, and I think we'll be good. Let's test the fitment. Almost there. We've got one piece right here that's interfering, and then I think we'll be good. So it's basically this section right here. That's out. Okay. All right, let's test the fitment. I think we're good. Yep. There we go. So we are good. So you can see that it's very close to mounting in there. So basically the next step is you want to just get any of these pieces out. We'll do a little bit more thorough cleaning after we finalize our test fit. So this goes here. And this goes here. And yeah, looks like it fits really well. So now what I need to do is basically drill through. These are 3.5mm holes. Drill straight through those, and then we'll test fit the gauge itself. All right, so if you have a 3.5mm drill bit, you could use that, or start with something a little bit smaller and then step up. Okay. So let's see if this is a good size. The screws are included in the kit. So 3mm screws, a little bit tight. So I'm going to use a slightly larger drill bit, and that'll give us a little bit of space to also adjust if needed. Okay, so that's good. All right, so it looks like that fits well. And then the piece on the back goes like so. And you could see that the holes line up for the gauge and go straight through. So that looks pretty good. So let's just do a test fit real quick. So we'll use our screws that are included in the kit. They have washers and lock nuts. So make sure those are all set up first. And then the other thing too that you can do, so you'll see that on the back of the cluster, there's this one section of circuit board that kind of sticks up, and you don't want this to be here because this is a ground and it's very close to this connector. So use a knife and just cut it off right here because you don't need that. All right, so now that we've cleaned that out, let's go ahead and do a test fit. So we want to make sure we have the bracket on the front, the bracket on the back, put the gauge in there in the right spot approximately, hold it in place. And then you want to put the screw through and make sure it lines up with the hole in the back of the gauge. Okay, so that one's in. That one's in. And that one is in as well. Like I mentioned, you want to cut off this portion of the circuit board. This is a ground that you don't need, and it will potentially interfere with the wiring. So there we go. Gauge is in there. You can see the location's really good. It's not touching anything or getting caught on anything. Trip reset works. You can see on the side, looks really good. And then the remaining gauges, as you put them back in, they will all fit properly and line up where they're supposed to go. So now this is a good opportunity to clean everything out. So clean out the cluster, clean off any of your gauges that have anything on them. Make sure you get rid of any of the blue, leftover chunks of plastic from when you were cutting with the Dremel. Make sure that when you put it back together, you use the bezel and the acrylic from the 91 to 96 version. And then for the wiring, use our wiring kit. It'll actually connect to these 3 spots as well as 2 over here for power and ground. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I have this on my truck. It is super smooth. on the road. No bouncing, no more issues, and yeah, it works really well.